Hello, hello. Let me change my audio. What up? How's it going, everybody? Mr. Ocampo here with chapter 13 of Things Fall Apart. How you all doing? I know it's a last minute thing, but I completely forgot on Friday. I guess like last week just beat me up. With all the changes that are happening, we're moving pretty quickly as teachers. We're trying to make sure that everything is safe and set for those of you who are choosing to come back, that you are able to come back safely. I honestly have no idea what some of the details are still, so please be patient because we are still figuring that out, kids. We we know that a lot of you are done being at home. You're cooped up. You're ready to come back to school, but we got to do it safely. I'm not opposed to the idea much, even though it is, by the time you guys will be back in the classroom, it'll be April, and there's only a month and a half left of school. We'll see what happens. We'll see. This is the year to try new things. So let's try this hybrid instruction out. But until then, we are reading Things Fall Apart, chapter 13. This is a short one, kids. That's why I don't feel too bad with starting late, but start we must. Don't forget, in chapter 12, we had Obierka's daughter was married off, and Okonkwo was part of that whole process. It was a great celebration, but now we're going to see the exact opposite of a wedding. What's the exact opposite of a wedding? It's a funeral. Instead of celebrating the joining of two people into a new life, you mourn the loss of a loved one. So my question to you as we go into this reading, have you ever lost a loved one before? Have you ever experienced that grief, that anguish of, having someone no longer be part of your life? That's what we're talking about here. Plus, it is the end of part number 1. So this is actually, I mentioned in class that we are like on a roller coaster, and we've just been slowly going up that coaster, getting to know our characters, the culture of the Igbo tribe. But now we're at the top of the roller coaster, and by the end of chapter 13, we're going to take a peek over the edge and see just how far down we have to go. And it's kind of exciting. So there's a huge plot twist here that's going to affect our characters. So let's get to it. I'm going to be stopping as normal to do my think alouds, and possibly edit our slides. That's one of our questions that I want to ask you in class, and that if you're watching the replay, I want you to think about, how do you let out your grief? Well, I'll answer this question in a little bit. Let me explain or read about what's going on here. So chapter 13. Go, dee go, dee go, dee go. It was the Ekwe talking to the clan. One of the things every man learned was the language of the hollowed-out wooden instrument. Dum, 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 boomed the cannon at intervals. The first cock had not crowed, and Umofia was still swallowed up in sleep and silence when the Ekwe began to talk. The cannon shattered the silence. Men stirred on their bamboo beds and listened anxiously. Somebody was dead. The cannon seemed to rend the sky. Dee go, dee go, floated in the message-laden air. The faint and distinct wailing of women settled like a sediment of sorrow on the earth. Now and again a full-chested lamentation rose above the wailing whenever a man came into the place of death. He raised his voice once or twice in manly sorrow, and then sat down with the other men, listening to the endless wailing of the women and the esoteric language of the Ekwe. Now and again the cannon boomed. The wailing of the women would not be heard beyond the village, but the Ekwe carried the news to all the 9 villages and even beyond. It began by naming the clan, Umofia Obodo Dike, the land of the brave. Umofia Obodo Dike, Umofia Obodo Dike. It said this over and over again, and as it dwelt on it, anxiety mounted in every heart that heaved on a bamboo bed that night. Then it went nearer and named the village Iguedo of the Yellow Grinding Stone. It was Okonkwo's village. Again and again, Guido was called, and men waited breathlessly in all the 9 villages. At last, the man was named, and people sighed. Oh, Ezeudu is dead. A cold shiver ran down Okonkwo's back as he remembered the last time the old man had visited him. That boy calls you father, he had said. Bear no hand in his death. So if you guys remember, many chapters ago, before Okonkwo killed Ikemefuna, he was warned by this guy, Ezeudu, one of the elders of the clan, to not go. And this is the last thing that Okonkwo remembers from him. Some good advice. He didn't take it, but Ezeudu had his back. Ezeudu was a great man. And so, all the clan was at his funeral. The ancient drums of death beat. Guns and cannons were fired, and men dashed about in frenzy, cutting down every tree or animal they saw, jumping over walls and dancing on the roof. It was a warrior's funeral. From morning till night, warriors came and went in their age groups. They all wore smoked raffia skirts, and their bodies were painted with chalk and charcoal. Now and again, an ancestral spirit of Gugu appeared from the underworld, speaking in a tremulous, unearthly voice, and completely covered in raffia. Some of them were very violent, and there had been a mad rush for shelter earlier in the day, when one appeared with a sharp machete and was only prevented from doing serious harm by 2 men who restrained him with the help of a strong rope tied round his waist. Sometimes he turned round and chased after those men, but they ran for their lives. But they always returned to the long rope he trailed behind. He sang in a terrifying voice that a Quensu, or evil spirit, had entered his eye. So we're seeing that people are coming from all over to pay honor to Ezeudu. They all wore smoked raffia skirts, and their bodies were painted with chalk and charcoal, which I would say is kind of like the equivalent of how, if we show up to a funeral, you wear like a suit. You don't show up in like your party clothes. You show up to pay respects, and that's what they're doing. However, when we pay respects, at least in our culture, we're usually quiet. You bring some flowers. If you're religious, you say a prayer. But in this culture, they are going nuts. They look at that. They cut down trees, and any animals they saw, they jump over walls and dance on the roofs. Like a while back, I lost my grandfather when I was in high school, a freshman in high school. I lost my grandfather, and I remember the anguish, the how I felt. I was like incredibly sad. I would go on long walks and just cry. My cousin would be on the phone with me, and we would just cry about how much we miss our grandpa. And I remember like one of our family like get-togethers, my uncles, his kids, my uncles, like they would let out their grief in a different way. Long story short, I found one uncle in the bathtub with a bottle of alcohol in the morning, and the other one had come home just like recently. He had taken a long hike, and he had just come back, and we had to dress up and get ready for the funeral, So before we bury our dead in our culture, at least maybe some of you can relate. We have a wake or a viewing, a celebration of life. You go to a funeral home, and the body of the deceased is preserved. It's dressed up. It's put in a really nice coffin. And you can see the body, and you can pay your respects. You can pray. You can, all that. You can cry. You can mourn. I remember all of that. It's weird. One of my cousins was practicing photography, and he set up his tripod and his camera, and he took pictures of everyone who was coming up to say goodbye to my grandpa. And I was like, this is the weirdest freaking thing that you're doing, man. Like, he's like, I know, but I want to remember this moment. Everyone's like, so their emotions are so raw. I was like, yeah, you're right. But this was his way of coping with it, to look at it literally from a lens of like art. It was weird. Everyone copes with grief differently. That's why I asked, how do you let out your grief? Do you cry? Do you write? Do you, get angry and destroy things? Like, how do you let out your grief? Not every way, like my uncle in the bathtub, is a healthy way to express your grief and anguish, but we all have different ways. And in this culture, it sounds like a lot like ours. You know, they're visiting Ezeudu and they're paying their respects. But the most dreaded of all was yet to come. He was always alone and was shaped like a coffin. A sickly odor hung in the air wherever he went, and flies went with him. Even the greatest medicine men took shelter when he was near. Many years ago, another Igugu had dared to stand his ground before him, and had been transfixed to the spot for 2 days. This one had only one hand, and it carried a basket full of water. But some of the Igugu were quite harmless. One of them was so old and infirm that he leaned heavily on a stick. He walked unsteadily to the place where the corpse was laid, gazed at it a while, and went away again to the underworld. The land of the living was not far removed from the domain of the ancestors. There was coming and going between them, especially at festivals and also when an old man died, because an old man was very close to the ancestors. A man's life from birth to death was a series of transition rites which brought him nearer and nearer to his ancestors. So in this culture, they it seems like they don't see getting older as a bad thing. They see it actually as a good thing, because you're getting closer to the ancestors, the immortal spirits of the people who came before you. And that's cool. And as you get older and as you age, you become wiser and you become closer to that. And I think that's really cool. I think that is pretty awesome. So, difference there. I don't know how many people have had an existential crisis yet. You students are still too young, I think, to really feel your age. But I've had a lot of moments with my friends that are like, man, why are we getting older? What are we all doing this for? It's the same crazy thoughts, But it looks like, the older you get in this culture, the better. It's pretty cool. You get a lot of respect. And I'm of the culture where we do respect our elders. I can't imagine putting my parents into an elderly home, a retirement home or something like that. I feel like in my culture, we have to take care of our elderly. They've taken care of us when we were kids. Now we take care of them in their old life. And that's, to each their own, but that's my culture. I think it's cool. All right. Ezeudu had been the oldest man in his village, and at his death, there were only 3 men in the whole clan who were older, and 4 or 5 others in his own age group. Whenever one of these ancient men appeared in the crowd to dance unsteadily the funeral steps of the tribe, younger men gave way, and the tumult subsided. It was a great funeral, such as befitted a noble warrior. As the evening drew near, the shouting and the firing of guns, the beating of drums, and the brandishing and clanging of machetes increased. Ezeudu had taken 3 titles in his life. It was a rare achievement. There are only 4 titles in the clan, and only 1 or 2 men in any generation ever achieved the 4th and the highest. When they did, they became the lords of the land. Because he had taken titles, Ezeudu was to be buried after dark with only a glowing brand to light the sacred ceremony. But before this quiet and final rite, the tumult increased tenfold. Drums beat violently and men leaped up and down in frenzy. Guns were fired on all sides and sparks flew out as machetes clanged together in warrior salutes. The air was full of dust and the smell of gunpowder. It was then that the one-handed spirit came, carrying a basket full of water. People made way for him on all sides and the noise subsided. Even the smell of gunpowder was swallowed in the sickly smell that now filled the air. He danced a few steps to the funeral drums and then went to see the corpse. "Ezeudu," he called in his guttural voice. "If you had been poor in your last life, I would have asked you to be rich when you come again, but you are rich. If you had been a coward, I would have asked you to bring courage, but you were a fearless warrior. If you had died young, I would have asked you to get life, but you lived long. So, I shall ask you to come again the way you came before. If your death was the death of nature, go in peace. But if a man caused it, do not allow him a moment's rest." He danced a few more steps and went away. The drums and the dancing began again and reached fever heat. See, if and when I die, I would like to have someone say some nice words for me. I have some other thoughts as well about, what should be done when I die. I want to. I don't want to be laid to rest in a coffin. I think I want to be strapped to a firework, sent into space, and blown up. That way I can go out with a bang. Ah! The drums and the dancing began again and reached fever heat. Darkness was around the corner, and the burial was near. Guns fired the last salute, and the cannon rent the sky. And then, from the center of the delirious fury came a cry of agony and shouts of horror. It was as if a spell had been cast. All was silent. In the center of the crowd, a boy lay in a pool of blood. It was the dead man's 16-year-old son, who with his brothers and half-brothers had been dancing the traditional farewell to their father. Okonkwo's gun had exploded, and a piece of iron had pierced the boy's heart. Talk about tragedy. You're at a funeral, and someone else related to the person who's being buried dies. And that's not just anyone, it's his 16-year-old son. This is tragedy. Like I said, we're at the top of the coaster and we're looking down. And of course it's Okonkwo. But here's the thing, I had a question about this in one of my classes. Did Okonkwo point the gun at this kid and kill him? No. That's not the case. I believe Okonkwo was doing what everyone else was doing. They were shooting their gun into the air as kind of a salute. But the thing is, old guns back then, especially the ones that you had to pack yourself, or if they were like handmade but poorly made, the way that a gun works, there's some gunpowder, it explodes. The explosion shoots a little metal like bullet out of a barrel and wherever you're pointing it, But if for some reason the bullet gets stuck or there's a flaw in the firing mechanism, the explosion will just expand outwards and it'll break the gun. And that's what happened. It shattered the gun and it turned it into basically a grenade. And one of the pieces of the gun had pierced one of the boy's hearts. And that's pretty tragic. Sounds like a swift death, but dang. So it was an accident. It was an accident. The confusion that followed was without parallel in the tradition of Umofia. Violent deaths were frequent, but nothing like this had ever happened. The only course open to Okonkwo was to flee from the clan. It was a crime against the Earth Goddess to kill a clansman, and a man who committed it must flee from the land. The crime was of two kinds, male and female. Okonkwo had committed the female because it had been inadvertent or accidental. He could return to the clan after 7 years. So, Okonkwo, I like how they name it male and female. And if inadvertent is the female, then we can assume that male means you did it on purpose. That's the male crime. Interesting. I want to say that's the more severe crime too. Like if Okonkwo actually pointed the gun at this kid and murdered him, that would be a male crime. And I think that would land him in a lot more trouble. It looks like his sentence here is he could return to the clan after 7 years. So he's exiled. He's got to go. But after 7 years, he can come back. I'm not sure if you know much about our American legal system, but we do have a couple of classifications for crimes. And the ones that I'm thinking of now are homicide and involuntary manslaughter. Homicide is you have the intent to kill someone, and you do. You intend to murder, and you do. First degree murder. I think. I don't know. I don't know too much about murder. So both things are probably homicide. One of them is first degree murder. The other one is involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter is like you didn't mean to do it, but you still killed him anyway. It's like me getting really angry at someone and then using my car to run them over, versus me just driving down the street and someone just so happens to step in front of me and I run them over. Both times I kill someone, but one time there's intent, the other time there isn't. It's an accident. So that's what they're describing here. One is male, one is female. And Okonkwo committed the female, the accident, the involuntary manslaughter. And his sentence is 7 years of banishment. That night, he collected his most valuable things into headloads. Yo, this all happened in one day. Remember, it started way early in the morning with an announcement using the drums and stuff, and then they mourn throughout the day, and then right before like the day is over, they try to have this funeral, but instead of a funeral, there's a murder, and so by the end of the day, Okonkwo is in trouble and he has to leave his home. What an incredible turn of events! One thing, Okonkwo is sleeping in his hut, and the next he is on his way out into exile. Insane. His wives wept bitterly, and their children wept with them, without knowing why. Obierka and half a dozen other friends came to help and to console them. They each made 9 or 10 trips, carrying Okonkwo's yams to store in Obierka's barn, and before the cock crowed, Okonkwo and his family were fleeing to his motherland. It was a little village called Mbanta, just beyond the borders of Mbino. Oh, I think this is where Ikemefuna is from. As soon as the day broke, a large crowd of men from Ezeudu's quarters stormed Okonkwo's compound, dressed in garbs of war. They set fire to his houses, demolished his red walls, killed his animals, and destroyed his barn. It was the justice of the earth goddess, and they were merely her messengers. Yo, sounds like law enforcement. I don't make the laws, I just enforce them. And that's what they're doing. They're enacting the judgment. That's really it. They had no hatred in their hearts against Okonkwo. His greatest friend, Obierka, was among them. They were merely cleansing the land which Okonkwo had polluted with the blood of his clansmen. So no one's got any bad feelings toward Okonkwo. They just know, like, yo, man, this is the law of the land. This is what's got to be done. No hard feelings. So they destroy his home. Obierka was a man who thought about things. When the will of the goddess had been done, he sat down in his obi and mourned his friend's calamity. Why should a man suffer so grievously for an offense he had committed inadvertently? But although he thought for a long time, he found no answer. He was merely led into greater complexities. He remembered his wife's twin children, whom he had thrown away. Whoa. Do you remember when we were discussing in Woye? One of his like traumatizing events in his life is that he was walking home and he heard crying in the evil forest. That's these twins, the twin children. The twin children were thrown away by Obierka. Those are his kids. Even though he says it's his wife's twin children. He had to throw them away. Throw them away in the evil forest. But he's not just one to, just accept the law. He's wondering why. What crime had they committed? And he's wondering, about Okonkwo. It's why are we doing this to him? He didn't mean to. But he follows the rules. The earth had decreed that they were an offense on the land and must be destroyed. And if the clan did not exact punishment for an offense against the great goddess, her wrath was loosed on all the land and not just on the offender. As the elders said, if one finger brought oil, it soiled the others. Are there any rules that you disagree with? Anything where it's man, that's just not fair. That's too severe. Why do we have this rule? Obierka's the same way. I wonder, why are we putting away people in jail for having, I don't know, marijuana on them, when it's legal now? Which, by the way, I don't think they're putting people in jail anymore. I think it's just a fine. It's more like it's a controlled substance still, but because it's not federally illegal, but it is in the state. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. He has thoughts about his justice system, just like I do. I have thoughts about our justice system. There are things that, it doesn't make sense to put someone away for an ounce for several years of their lives, potentially keeping them away from a family and from experiences that would actually make them a better person. But you get some rich guy who steals millions of dollars from their business, and they get a fine and a slap on the wrist and maybe a couple months in jail. That's messed up, So I hope this chapter makes you think about our justice system and, just like Obierka does about with his. You might not have the answers, but the fact is you feel some sort of way toward it, right? Anyways, they enact the punishment. Okonkwo's gone from the village. And he's going to spend 7 years away. A lot can happen in 7 years. Think about like what has happened in the last 7 years. Like what has changed? Like, well, we used to have Vine and Musically, but now we have TikTok. We used to have, no electric cars, and now we do. And GameStop used to be worth only $4, but now it's worth like 100 and something. A lot has changed in 7 years. And when you put someone away for that long, and they're isolated and they come back and they see what has changed, I wonder what will happen to them. Especially like, if you were imprisoned in the 90s and you were serving a 30-year sentence and you came out this year, oh my God, what a culture shock. Because a lot has changed, like the internet, touch screens, like FaceTiming people, just the culture of everything must have changed. And that's why what we're going to see in part 2. Okonkwo was going to come back in 7 years, and we know what happens historically to Africa. We're going to see how Okonkwo reacts to all of this. For some reference, I know we've been at it at a long time, but for reference, here is the book, and this is what we're looking at here. This is how much we've completed. This is how much we have left. We are more than halfway done with this book. And it takes just as long to get up that roller coaster as it is to go through the ride. That's where we're going to go. We're going through the ride right now. And we're going to see how Okonkwo reacts to all of these changes. So all of this was culture building and world building. I hope that those of you who are lost or have any questions, feel like you can talk to me and ask me, or you can look at any of these recordings, because I hope I did a good job at breaking down what's going on in the story. That way you're prepared to take on what happens next, because this story shows you just how significant an impact the historical colonization of Africa has had on cultures and people. So be ready to take notes. But first and foremost, it's the end of quarter 3. I hope that you're turning in your work. I'll be accepting work until Wednesday, 3/10. So March 10th is the last day I will accept work, and then I'll be grading everything, and then should be good to go. And then we'll start quarter 4 with part 2 if things fall apart. We'll finish it. We'll sum up our thoughts. There's going to be a lot of changes because of the hybrid instruction, but we'll make it through together. No worries. Thank you as always for tuning in. I really hope that these, YouTube videos aren't a waste of time and they actually help. Or maybe you'll look back on fondness with these memories. But anyways, thank you everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Monday afternoon, and I'll see you in class. Take care.